Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. So today, I am going to be recapping everything that happened in A Shadow in the Ember in preparation for A Light in the Flame, which will be releasing on November 15th. Alright guys, so let me start by saying it has been a while since I've done a recap video, and like all my other recap videos, the editing in this might not be amazing. It is very hard to recap a 600-page book without taking any breaks. I'm gonna try my best, probably not gonna happen. I also want to point out that I do not suggest watching this video in lieu of actually reading A Shadow in the Ember. This is more of a refresher. Let's say you read the book when it first came out and you forget a lot of the more important points. So I would definitely still read A Shadow in the Ember prior to A Light in the Flame releasing if you haven't yet. Now, if you have read this, I hope this jogs your memory on everything that went down in A Shadow in the Ember. I know I forgot a lot and I picked up a lot more on my reread. So yeah, with all that being said, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit the notification bell to be notified whenever I post new Vikters content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads, both linked down below. With all out of the way, let's talk about A Shadow in the Ember. Alright guys, so we are going to break this into parts just for my own personal sanity. So our main character is Seraphena, or Sarah as she goes by in the book, and she was born to the king and queen of Lasania. Now, prior to her birth, Sarah's ancestors actually struck up a deal with Nyktos, the Primal of Death, that in return for him holding off this rot that's been plaguing their kingdom, they would give him the last-born daughter of the Mierel bloodline as his consort. So Nyktos agrees, and that is Sarah. So when Sarah is born, the rot actually starts back up again, and she is marked, I think, with a birthmark as the maiden. So her family knows that she is eventually going to be Nyktos' consort. So her father, who is not happy about this, ends up committing suicide, but the queen ends up training her to be his consort. She learns how to pleasure a man, but she also learns some assassin skills. So the queen believes that Sarah really needs to kill Nyktos to make sure this rot doesn't end up spreading, so he might go back on his word, they just don't know. So they know they can end this rot by killing Nyktos. So that is Sarah's one goal, and on her 17th birthday, she is taken to this temple where she is to be presented to Nyktos and be his consort. So Nyktos actually ends up showing up, and he whispers in Sarah's ear, yeah, I don't need a consort, and he goes away. So the queen is very upset. I think she actually slaps her daughter and is like, you have failed the realm. We're all gonna die because of you. So Sarah ends up not telling anyone what Nyktos said, and instead everyone kind of has like a little bit of hope that Nyktos might eventually end up taking Sarah, but it's not looking great. So Sarah ends up being used by her mother as like a hitman to like kill enemies, but also is really just treated terribly by her family. So the only people that don't treat her really badly are Sir Holland, who is this guard that trains her, who has never lost hope that she will eventually be Nyktos' consort, and then her stepsister Ezra, who asks Sarah to use her abilities in order to save the poor and the children that are being used in these terrible slums. We also find out that Sarah has a power that she has been keeping hidden. So Sarah is able to bring back the life of animals, and one day someone sees her, I believe it's her stepbrother, sees her bringing back the life of her cat, and the entire family freaks out and is like, you have to keep this very hush-hush, only because you are to be the consort of the god of death. So you bringing life into animals is kind of like you bringing or stealing souls from him. So he might not be happy. So like, please don't do that. Stop doing it. So she tries her best not to, but sometimes she just has a soft heart and she does end up bringing some people back. So anyway, that is pretty much where we start the story off, and that is going to end the first part. All right, so moving into part two. So it has been 3 years since Nyktos originally did not take Sarah as his consort. So like I said, she has been living a pretty terrible life, and one day while she is walking around doing her like assassin stuff, she sees these gods. And I will say, prior to this, I didn't realize that it wasn't necessarily commonplace, but it also wasn't really out of the ordinary for there to be gods just kind of mingling with humans. So as long as it's gods and not primals, it's kind of acceptable to see gods walking around. Primals are like the super gods. I'm going to get more into an explanation of that as we go. So anyway, she sees these gods and they end up killing a man and a baby, and right away she's like, oh my gosh, they can't do this. But before she goes to try and stop them, her mouth is covered and she's pulled into the chest of this very tall, very handsome being. So he says his name is Ash, and we eventually find out that he is a god himself. So she thinks he is just a minor god, and they have some very cute back and forth banter, and he ends up calling her Lisa. So now, for those of you who have read From Blood and Ash, you know what that word means. So right away, you're starting to think, ooh, this is obviously the love interest. So they end up parting ways, and she ends up running into her stepbrother. Like I mentioned earlier, he was the one who told about the cat, and he's just kind of a jerk. I believe his name is Travius. He is next in line to become the king. And he is just a little bit unhinged. So everyone's very worried for when the king eventually dies, him being the next in line. Also, shortly after all of this happens, there is an accident with Ezra, her stepsister. Ezra's girlfriend ends up being injured, and Sarah ends up being able to bring her back from death. So we weren't exactly positive she could bring humans back up to this point. So that was like a crazy revelation. So then it's kind of like ordinary day to day. And then Sarah ends up running into Ash again. And they actually end up being attacked by these monsters. And one of the monsters was actually a body that was killed by one of the gods they saw previously, but has now reanimated and come back to life. So we know that these gods are able to bring back humans and kind of turn them into monsters, which is very upsetting. And Ash really doesn't know how this is happening, so he's trying to get down to the bottom of it. So anyway, they end up having a spicy moment by a lake. They don't have sex, but they do a little bit of foreplay stuff, and they just have a great time. And really, Sarah just opens up to Ash rather quickly, and same with Ash. So they part ways again. Now, when Sarah goes back to her house, she ends up going to sleep, and when she wakes up, Travius, her stepbrother, is just standing over her like a creeper, and he is like, hey, you don't respect me, and I'm done with it. So she goes to grab a knife that she has under her pillow. The knife is gone. She realizes that Travius has taken it. So she's kind of freaking out. She doesn't know what to do. She ends up being taken to the place where they originally tried to summon Nyktos as her consort. I forget the exact name. It's kind of like a statue, place with a lot of statues. Anyway, she ends up being chained to the statue of Nyktos by her stepbrother, who is now king. It turns out the king actually passed away, so now Travius is the new king, and that is just very scary for the realm. So he ends up chaining Sarah to this statue and begins whipping her. So she just feels utter rage, but then also just desperation, and she's just not happy about this, but she also isn't going to show pain because she's Sarah and she's just a badass. So anyway, as she's being whipped, eventually the entire place starts to rumble and a god shoots out of the floor. This god happens to be Ash, and we find out that Ash is actually Nyktos, the Primal of Death. Oh my gosh, we had no idea. So anyway, he shoots up and he's like, yeah, that's mine, which, oh my god, love when we get like the whole alpha thing. And he was like, you cannot harm her, I'm gonna kill you. So he ends up getting Sarah free, and Sarah's like, no, I don't want you to kill my stepbrother. And he just kind of looks at her and he's like, fine. So then Sarah kills her stepbrother, and I'm pretty sure she shoves the whip that he used to whip her down his throat. And it's chef's kiss. It was an amazing scene. I absolutely loved it. So then we find out that Nyktos/Ash has actually known that Sarah was the consort the entire time. And although he didn't want a consort, he now realizes that he has to take her back to his lands because she's going to be killed, because she just killed a king and you can't do that. It's bad. So he's like, you're going to have to come back to the Shadowlands. You're going to be my consort. We're going to figure all this out. Now, Sarah feels a little bit betrayed because she's like, my life has been terrible because you rejected me 3 years ago. How dare you do this? And they have to kind of figure out a lot of stuff. So Ezra, her stepsister, ends up becoming queen. And that is where we leave off with the humans. All right, so moving into part 3, and this is where it's going to start getting a little bit confusing, so just bear with me. So we are now moving into the Elysium, into the Shadowlands. So Sarah is having to kind of figure out a lot of things. So she still needs to kill Nyktos in order to end this rot that is plaguing her kingdom. And she knows this is her duty. So although she does feel betrayed by Nyktos/Ash, she goes along with him to the Shadowlands. Now, she also has kind of had this friendship with Ash, so she really is torn on what to do. So we also find out that Ash actually is not the Nyktos that made this deal. That was honestly his father. So, on top of all of this, and I'm going to try to explain this the best I can, we find out that Kolis, who is known in the human world as the god of life, or the primal of life, is actually not. So the people in the world where Sarah is living in still give their third sons and daughters to Kolis, and Kolis is described in the book as having these, he's absolutely beautiful, he's super kind, he's the primal of life, but if you look upon him, there is this, burning light, and you really can't make out his facial features. So we find out that Kolis is actually the god of death and also Ash's uncle. So, at one point, there was Nyktos and Kolis. Nyktos was actually the primal of life, and Kolis was the primal of death. However, Kolis ended up falling in love with this human girl. And obviously, this human girl is like, the primal of death is after me. Oh my gosh, freaks out, jumps off a cliff. Bit of an over-exaggeration, not sure why she did that, but anyway, that's what she did. So Kolis is just heartbroken. He's like, I love this girl, even though I just saw her, never actually talked to her. And brother, please bring her back since you are the primal of life. And Nyktos is like, hey, she's already passed on to the Veil. Her soul's happy. I can't do this. So somehow Kolis is able to switch him and Nyktos's powers. So then Kolis becomes the primal of life, and he does this just to bring this girl back. And Nyktos becomes the primal of death. So Sarah is obviously just mind blown by all of these revelations. So we find out that Ash is actually the son of Nyktos, and that he never made the deal with her ancestors. That was his father. So on top of all of this, we find out that Nyktos actually took the soul of the girl that Kolis did all this to bring back, and instead of letting her soul pass on into the afterlife, he was like, I'm just gonna let you get reincarnated over and over again so my brother can never find you, and you can kind of get some vengeance for all of this happening. And she's like, bet, and that's what ends up happening. So now we know that there is the soul of this girl that is just being reborn and reborn again. We eventually do find out that this soul was put into the Mierel bloodline, hence it is highly suggested that Sarah is this girl, and at the end we do find out that Sarah is this soul that Kolis originally wanted, and which is why he switched places with his brother. It's a lot. So anyway, Sarah finds all this out and is just like, oh my gosh, can't believe it. Also, while all of this is going on, when Sarah enters the Elysium, she sees these Draken. So she mistakes them for dragons, but Ash right away tells her that no, they're actually Draken. My father wanted to be able to communicate with dragons, and he ended up giving some the power to transform into humans. So the first one we meet is Nyktos. Yes, that is unbelievably similar to Nyktos. I don't know why Jennifer L. Armentrout loves to do this, but Nyktos is the biggest and baddest dragon, and Sarah, right away, they just get along really well. We also meet Reaver, who I believe is 10 years old at the time of this book, but we definitely see Reaver again in A War of Two Queens from the From Blood and Ash series. And we also meet Jadis. So Jadis is only 4 years old in this book, and I believe this is the dragon that goes missing in The War of Two Queens, or The Crown of Gilded Bones, where Nyktos says, hey, can you find my son, but also can you find this dragon that's gone, or this Draken that's gone missing. So anyway, a lot of big revelations take place during this time. While all of this is going on, Sarah is slowly falling in love with Ash. They have a really great relationship. They have some very steamy moments, but eventually Ash realizes that Sarah was planning on killing him. I'm not exactly sure why Sarah just kind of openly admits this, but she says that I pretty much came to assassinate you because I thought you were causing the rot. And in reality, she is not causing the rot. So we are going to get into that in the next part. All right, moving in to part 4. I hope you guys are still with me. So we find out that Nyktos, when he became the Primal of Death, actually still had this little ember of life in him because he had been born to be the Primal of Life. And vice versa, Kolis still has an Ember of Death in him. And this unbalance is actually partly what is causing the rot. So what Kolis ends up doing, or what Nyktos ends up doing, is he takes that Ember of Life and he puts it in the soul of the Martel bloodline so that the last woman born of the Martel bloodline is one, going to be the reincarnated soul of the girl that Kolis is looking for, but also will have an Ember of the Primal of Life. He also takes the Ember from his son and gives it to her without his son knowing. So Ash also had this Ember of Life in him that was taken out and given to eventually Sarah. So that is why they had a bond so quickly. It's really because they're like two parts of the same soul. So Sarah finds all of this out, and it's a lot to take in. So then, while all of this is kind of being discovered, there is a battle that happens. So the gods from the very beginning of the story that I said were up to something and were reanimating dead bodies, they end up sending a bunch of like monsters to the Vale. Something happens, Ash ends up getting injured. So the only way for him to heal is to drink blood. Now he is very angry with Sarah at this point because, hey, Sarah was planning to assassinate him. Yes, it was for the good of his people, or for her people, but also she was gonna kill him. So he's just not happy with her. So he's pretty much like, look, you're gonna be my consort in name only until we can figure this stuff out, but I don't like you. So she ends up going to him and says, you have to drink blood from me, you're going to die, you're very weak. So he ends up drinking her blood, and in doing so, they end up having sex for the first time. And also the second time they have sex, Sarah ends up biting Nyktos / Ash, and this is going to be very important later in the book. So they end up doing this, and then Ash / Nyktos says, this doesn't change anything between us. I still don't want your friendship. You are still just like consort in name to me. So then we find out a little bit more about like the politics and the scheming. So eventually Sarah is kidnapped by the 3 gods I was talking about earlier, and one of them bites her, and when he bites her, he's like, oh my gosh, you are who Kolis has been looking for. And when he bit her, Sarah just felt such strong emotions that Nyktos / Ash felt them, was able to come and save her. And we find out through all of this that there is more to the story than we originally thought. So Ash / Nyktos ends up requesting information from the Ari or the Fates. Why haven't these people really been brought up much in this story until now? I'm not really sure. They were mentioned in the first chapter and then it was kind of dropped. So anyway, the Ari or the Fates, and I just keep thinking of the ones from Hercules, end up knowing about Sarah's future. So Ash / Nyktos requests an audience with them, and he says that the gods have no control over the Ari, so they might not answer. Or they might. So it turns out that they actually do. So they end up being summoned to this room, and who is there? Penelophe, the goddess Penelophe from Blood and Ash, and she says that she actually saw a prophecy of what was eventually going to happen, and she shared this prophecy with both Nyktos and Kolis. So luckily for me, thank goodness, I already did a whole thing where I read this prophecy, so we are going to cut to that clip real quick, and here you go. All right, so the prophecy in A Shadow in the Ember goes, from the desperation of golden crowns and born of mortal flesh, a great primal power rises as the heir to the lands and seas, to the skies and all the realms, a shadow in the ember, a light in the flame, to become a fire in the flesh. When the stars fall from the night, the great mountains crumble into the seas, and old bones raise their swords beside the gods. The false one, born of the same great and primal power in the mortal realm, a first daughter with blood full of fire, fated for the once promised king, and the second daughter with blood full of ash and ice, the other half of the future king. Together, they will remake the realm and usher in the end. So that is the prophecy that she ends up sharing. So after hearing this prophecy is when Nyktos, the elder Nyktos, realized that what he had to do, so that's when he put the Ember of Life into the bloodline and all of that went down. So anyway, we find out that Sarah is probably going to die because all of her threads of fate are showing her dying on her 21st birthday, except for one thread that keeps blinking in and out. So that one thread is actually happening because when Sarah bit Ash/Nyktos and drank his blood, she started her own ascension. So what is an ascension? The ascension is when a god is turned into a primal. Now, mortals can't do this or it will kill them. However, because Sarah has the ember of a primal inside her, that's kind of what like started the whole process. So now she's very worried she's gonna die, and it gets worse when Penelophe is like, hey, there is a way to stop this. You have to be with and have the blood of the primal that you have the ember of in your body, and he has to love you because love is stronger than fate. And Nyktos is like, or Nyktos/Ash is like, oh crap, she's gonna die, which I actually thought was really funny. And Sarah was also like, oh crap, I guess I'm gonna die, because obviously something has been broken between these two main characters. And this final part is just gonna be elaborating on some parts and also talking about some things that I missed. So the big one is that if our main character, Sarah, is able to survive her ascension by having the blood of the same primal that she has the ember inside herself, and also he has to love her. If all of that happens and she's able to go through her ascension, she will actually become the new primal of life and thereby saving the realm. So I'm gonna kind of expand on why the realm is in danger. So this rot is taking place, and I mentioned this earlier, because Kolis still has an ember of death inside him. So we have Nyktos, who is now the god of death, and Kolis, and although he is the god of life, because he still has this ember of death, it is just causing unbalance because you have now two death primals ruling. So that is why this rot is like kind of destroying everything. So they're hoping that if Sarah is able to go through her ascension and survive, she will be the new primal of life and save everybody. Now, another big thing I forgot to mention is we find out about Vikters. So Vikters are these beings that are sent by the fates, and they are in charge of guarding people or beings that are going to play a big role in future events. So we learned a little bit about them, and we actually think that Sir Holland, from the very beginning of the story, the guard that I said was training Sarah and really looked after her and was the only person that was very kind to her, might be a Vikter. We find out at the very last chapter that is actually inaccurate. He is a fate or an Asari, and he actually was looking after Sarah because he was friends with Nyktos. He was friends with the original Nyktos when Nyktos was the god of life, Ash's father, and he just wanted to make sure that everything kind of went to plan, so he was taking care of her. So also, just to continue with the whole ascension, we are given clues that Sir Holland might have known a little bit more about the gods than we originally thought, because at one point, Sarah is talking about how she has these headaches and her guard used to give her these teas that really helped ease the pain. And we find out these headaches were caused by her ember of primal magic. And because she had this ember, she was going through like a little mini ascension, but she actually would never have ascended without the blood from Nyktos. I know, it's super confusing. But anyway, that is kind of how Nyktos/Ash realizes that that guard was definitely not just a guard, and he might know a little bit more about the gods. So yeah, I think that covers everything you're going to need to know before going into a light in the flame. Please let me know if you guys have any questions. Leave them down in the comments. I feel like this was a little bit of a chaotic video, but like I said, it's really hard to summarize a over 600-page book in a short YouTube video. I also was taking notes the entire time I was reading this book, so if you guys want my notes, I will be happy to send them to you. They go a little bit more in depth, and I did it like chapter by chapter. So yeah, I hope this video helps you guys out, and I cannot wait to read A Light in the Flame. I do plan on vlogging it, probably will contain spoilers, but I'm just so excited. So anyway, I said this already, I post new videos every Thursday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.